Hello everybody and welcome to Think Business. My name is Anton and I'm here with my partner Sarah.
Hiya! This is a podcast brought to you by the young minds of Hertwood House. My partners and I have made this podcast to encourage more discussions in and outside the classroom. Every day it becomes more important that young minds recognise the issues that are currently taking place in the business world and the economy, especially due to the recent events of the pandemic and other topics that we wish to speak about in due course. We will also be giving out crucial revision material to help A-level students in a time where resources are limited.
This is a pilot episode, so if you have any critique or suggestions, please be sure to leave them below in the comment section, and it would really help us in the future.
So in today's podcast, we want to talk about supply and demand. Supply and demand are very important in the business world because they both play huge impacts on all companies, as companies will find it very hard to trade unless they don't know about these two things. So let's start. Anton, what can you tell me about supply?
Supply is a quantity of a good or service that the supplier is willing and able to supply on the market at a given time or a given price.
Oh, okay. So the quantity supplied, from what you're saying, does that have a positive relationship?
Yeah, it does, as if price increases, the quantity supplied also increases.
Okay, so the higher the price, the more the supplier will be able to see an opportunity or have an incentive to increase total profit.
That's not actually true. It would be incentive to increase total revenue, and if costs are kept low or even lowered, then it would be increased profit.
Oh, okay. So quantity supplied have a positive relationship because the higher price leads to a higher quantity supplied, and a lower price leads to a lower quantity supplied. And that's the law of supply.
So now that we learned about supply, Sarah, what is demand?
Well, demand is the consumer's willingness and ability to be able to buy goods and services at a certain price over a period of time. And demand has its own law called the law of demand, which states that when the price increases, the quantity of demand decreases. And when the price decreases, the quantity of demand increases. So tell me what you think about that. What exactly do you think that means in comparison to what we said about the relationship between supply and price?
I'm pretty sure it's called negative relationship, or inverse, as some people call it.
Yes, you're right. Demand is how many consumers want to buy a product, and the demand will decrease if the price increases because consumers don't want to spend money unnecessarily, hence why it's called an inverse relationship. These two laws interact with each other to find the equilibrium, which is where the quantity supplied and the quantity demanded, they equalize each other. And this determines the market price and how many goods are actually traded on the market. So why don't you give me an example?
Yeah, sure. Let's say Toyota has a supply of cars at a low price, below the equilibrium, and they have a high demand for them. Toyota will then increase the price in order to gain higher total revenue. But by doing so, they will scare away some customers who will settle for cheaper alternatives. In theory, they should reach equilibrium again, where quantity supplied and quantity demanded are equal.
That's great, because if they have reached the equilibrium, it means they won't have excess demand or a shortage of supply. And if they do have excess demand or a shortage of supply, that is something called the disequilibrium.
Sarah, do you know what other factors can affect supply and demand?
Yes, I do. Let me start with supply. So there are actually 5 different factors that can affect the supply, and the way I remember it is through a fun little word called spite. So the 5 factors we have is subsidies, production costs, indirect taxation, new technology, and external shocks. And altogether, if you put them in a row, it actually says spite, which is really good for studying for exams when you need to revise.
If I'm not mistaken, doesn't subsidies increase supply?
Yes, it does. The government give a grant to a firm which actually allows them to have cheaper selling prices and produce more products. Production costs. So you already know what that means, Anton. If the cost of making a product changes, for example, rises, what will happen?
I'm pretty sure the supply will drop, as it costs more to make stuff.
Exactly. And if it was the other way around, then the amount supplied would rise.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell me some more about indirect taxation?
When the government taxes a company more, I'm pretty sure it will have to decrease supply as it has to account for these new taxes.
Like VAT?
Like VAT.
Oh, okay. So by increasing indirect taxation, this will actually increase the cost for the firm, meaning they have less money to spend on the quantity supplied.
And if it decreases, it will mean a company has more money to spend on supplying stuff, so it will supply more goods.
Oh, okay. So maybe if the indirect taxation was increased, companies would not have as much money to spend on stuff like, new technology to increase their production rate. Do you want to tell me some more about the new technology that can affect quantity supplied?
Yeah, for example, if a company replaces the human workers with robots, it can produce the goods quicker and more efficiently. Do you know what E stands for?
Yes, Anton, it stands for external shocks. Do you know what that means?
No, can you please explain?
Well, external shocks are unexpected events that happen, that you can't control. For example, the pandemic we're going through right now, that was unexpected, and that has caused many issues for companies all over the world. Or, for example, hurricanes and floods, poor harvests. All these things, they actually reduce the total quantity of an item available because of the shortage of natural resources and money.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's enough about supply. What about demand?
Well, there are 8 factors which affect demand. And the way that I learnt all these was through a word, and it's called SIDSCAFE. If I go through them, so the first one is, for S, is price of substitute products. Then changes in consumer incomes, demographics, population, geographical distribution, seasonality. Next one is price of complements, advertising and branding, fashion tastes and preferences, then external shocks. So, I'm not going to get into too much detail about those because it's pretty obvious what they already are. Because we already know that if the price of a product which is a substitute for another, if that price goes up, then the demand will decrease. Whereas if it was to go down, the price, then the demand would increase. And it's similar with complements. For example, if I had a laptop and a laptop charger, if the price of my laptop increased, then I wouldn't necessarily buy it anymore, and maybe then I wouldn't need the complement product of a charger. The demand would just decrease.
I'm pretty sure I know what the I stands for.
What is that then, Anton?
Doesn't it stand for consumer income? For example, if people earn more money, they can purchase more stuff, so demand will increase. But if their paychecks decrease, that means they won't be able to buy so much.
Yes, that's very true. The next non-price factor which affects demand is fashion, tastes and preferences. Trends move very quickly, hence why it's so difficult to have a business in retail. One week you could be wearing skinny jeans and the next week they're not in fashion anymore. So when trends are changing so fast, if you buy a whole stock of one product, it won't be in fashion next week, and you still have to be able to sell those products. So that really affects demand because it might be in demand this week, but it won't be in demand next week. So the demand would decrease.
And I'm sure A stands for advertising and branding.
Of course. Advertising is very important. If you don't advertise your business, how does the consumer know where you are? And then the next one we have, what do you think D stands for?
Doesn't it stand for demographic and population? Like age of people, their location, their gender?
Yes, it does. And in fact, this is very important because I could have a business for surfboards, but if my business for surfboards was in the Alps in France, I would not have a high demand as nobody wants surfboards in the mountains, which is why geographical distribution is very important.
Final one is S, which stands for seasonality, which means how seasons affect our demand. For example, you're not going to buy winter hats during summer, or you're not going to buy sports shirts during the winter.
Unless you're Anton.
Then perhaps you would.
Okay, well thank you very much, Anton, because now I definitely understand the difference between the non-price factors that influence demand and the non-price factors that influence quantity supplied. And now I can also explain the difference between a positive relationship and a negative or inverse relationship. Okay, so if I'm correct, can you remind me if the word that we used for demand was spite?
No, that's not correct. You use spite for supply.
Oh, okay,
Supply
Anton.
factors. And you use SIDSCAFE for demand factors.
SIDSCAFE. Okay, thank you very much. I'll remember that. SIDSCAFE is the word I'll use to remember demand, and spite is the word I will use when remembering quantity supplied.